I actually care that
Right.
their technique changes. And I care so much that I'm willing to allow them to fail in front of me because I know that when I help them go through the process of how to practice, they're going to get better. It's, I mean, look, you can look at any PGA Tour player, LPGA Tour player, or your recreational golfer at their club. They do not raise to the level of their training. They lower to the level of their training. And that's a really hard concept for a lot of people to accept because if they're good in practice, they can't figure out why they're good on the course. And there are definitely athletes that practice their way into a problem. And there are other athletes that practice their way out of a problem. And you just have to decide who are you. And I guess that's my long-winded way to say your study about the surgeons is right. But I don't believe you have to do more surgeries to be more effective. I believe you have to see more stuff.
All right, guys, this is part two of our interview here, our chat with Zach. We got cut off there in the first part, and he left off at challenge and internal focus, which is two fantastic topics for us to really kick this fireside off with. The best part about this part of the conversation is I don't have to screen share anymore, so we can just flow with it. All
Let's
right.
do it.
So, appropriate challenge level is what we were talking about, and you got into internal focus there. Okay. And I kind of want to kick this off with that internal focus and what we have actually seen with modern technology. I was talking about brain imaging and the ability to see what people are experiencing real time, right? They can actually track the electronics that are going on in your head. And what we see is someone who's learning a new skill or who has not refined their skills well, has a lot of activity going on in that prefrontal cortex. Okay. That's where your cognitive thinking goes on. Okay. And then it's the supplemental motor area is where we see the more refined skill. It's basically the autopilot. Okay. It's in the middle of the brain. I can't ever remember. There's a couple different parts of it, but that's where you see the activity for those who are at an elite level in whatever field they're performing in. The one that I'm referring to in particular is a surgery study that was done on surgeons that had been in the field for I think 15 to 20 years, and then novice surgeons who had just gotten into the field. And when we get into that internal focus, what I see is that cognitive thinking, right? We want that for the learning experience, but if we have that when we're trying to perform, right, it literally takes over the autopilot, right? That just flow zone that we get into. Steve Yellen and I, he was one of my early interviews in this podcast too, and he calls it swing jail or swing prison, right?
Yeah.
It's where we get over the ball and we need to perform, we need to hit the shot, and all of a sudden we're thinking about where the club is or where our elbow is, and we cut off that signal, right? That strong signal that we've learned to develop over a period of time while we've refined our skills, we just interrupt that signal, right? It's essentially mistrust of yourself, right? It's really where it comes from. Okay. So how do you balance because I know you're a swing nerd, right? Okay. We've
Big
talked
time.
I remember the last time we talked in person, you were with Gravity Fit. I think you just got with Gravity Fit. You were talking about my early extension, and I had to tell you I had a surf injury, and I'm an old man now, and I have to early extend, otherwise I hurt 9 holes in.
Yeah, I got you.
So how do you balance that fine line, right? Because we need to develop the motor skills. We need to have some semblance. We need to have some internal focus when we're making some of those motor skills. How do we cross that bridge, right? How do we implement an external focus that pairs well with that internal focus so that they're not constantly in that prefrontal cortex cognitive thinking process rather than performance process?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to the type of player that you're coaching, right? If you have a novice player, this is extremely easy to solve because you just create an environment where they learn new skills by being externally focused, and they become obsessed with, they get their desired result when they put their focus in the correct place. For me, with the athletes that I'm privileged to coach, I'm dealing with a lot of scar tissue. I'm
Sure.
dealing with players that have believed that when they focus internally on their club face, that helps them play better. And when you try and take that away, you're taking away their Linus blanket, so to speak, and they don't know what to do. And so I 100% believe that the way that you teach a new skill is the way that that player is going to access that new skill. So as a coach, if you see your players too swing centric and they believe that the way they're going to do it is by having to slow down their swing or put it in a position, or they need a mirror or they need a camera, unfortunately, I'm telling you this because this is the mistake I made as a coach.
Yeah.
I used
No,
to
we all
coach
have,
that.
dude.
I used to
Yeah.
I used to make that mistake, right? And I was like, why are all my guys so obsessed with this position? And then I was like, oh, I know why. Like I went back and I watched their videos or I looked at their feedback that I sent them. And I was like, that's my fault. And so then I started to think, okay, why would I want them to be internal? Right. And so there's those steps, right? The cognitive phase, the associative phase, and then the autonomous phase. In order to go through those phases, you have to learn what we're working on, right? So I present the information. Let's say it was you in early extending, right? And we realize you have a physical limitation. So we're going to allow you to early extend, but we're going to try and make sure that the dynamic loft is correct so the shot can be the way that you
Right.
want. So let's say we had to learn how to get into our left side a little bit more. And I could do that by showing you your force plate information. I could do that by showing you video, or I could put out a gate that said, launch this ball underneath this thing, George.
Right.
And then I would show them the video and say, when you thought about going underneath the gate, look what that did to your technique. Look what that did to your TrackMan numbers. Look what that did to your swing catalyst or your gas force plate numbers. And that is where I believe the internal and external issue comes from. It's not the player's fault. It's the way that they're taught the skill. And so I'm now pretty obsessed with making sure that when I'm teaching a player a new skill, I'm reminding them of what they need to do to achieve that skill. And
Right.
then I show them the feedback so that they see that afterwards and then they value where their energy was is where their focus goes, their energy goes, right? Or
Right.
vice versa. So for you to launch it under the gate, did I have to teach you ulnar deviation of the lead wrist? Maybe, but maybe by you trying to get that ball underneath it, you learned how to do it. And that's where I think as an industry we need to get.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And again, kind of back to what I was talking about the matchups earlier. That was kind of how I solved it, man. I just opened up my pelvis a little bit, right? Opened my stance up a little bit, allows me to rotate without hitting that range of limitation on my lower lumbar. Now I'm not flipping at the ball. I'm able to rotate through all the way. You know what I mean? So there's solutions to things, but again, you got to understand not only the concepts at play, but the relationships between all those variables. Because
Yeah.
it's kind of like the cartoon when we were kids, the little Dutch boy in the dam,
Yeah.
right? You plug up one hole and it springs leak over somewhere else. So if we don't understand that relationship, make sure we're plugging the right holes. You know what I mean? We're not going to see those performance enhancements.
Yeah. And I guess that's a great point. And I hear that said to me all the time, right? Like cause and effect. But Ian and I chat about it a lot when we do our coaching seminars or we're working with players together. My golf philosophy has kind of this foundation that the mind controls the
Sure.
body controls the club controls the ball. And
Right.
so if I'm just teaching the club, I'm missing a step. If
Right.
I'm just teaching the mind, I'm missing a step. And that goes back to that same thing we were talking about in the previous conversation. It's not just working on one skill in isolation, it's all of them. So the ball will tell you what you did. And your coach's job or your job as the athlete is to then go backwards and say, what can I do to influence this golf ball? Right? Whether that is being in the correct state of mind, whether that's being, like you said, opening up your body and knowing your limitations, or that's going through a process that allows you to see the start line, whatever it might be. But the internal external thing is really about how you practice. The challenge point is also about how you practice. I have players now that come through my program and they go off to the collegiate level and they always call me and they always say, man, I miss those days where you made me do X exercise or you pushed me till I wanted to break and then I persevered, because they now associate their growth with failure. It would be amazing if, as an industry, we stop talking about technique and games and we started to understand that those two things can be in harmony.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure, man. Well, I think it's not necessarily that technique is a bad thing. I don't want people to think that that's the message we're putting across. It's that the application and misapplication of technical things, right?
Yeah,
So
no, for sorry to interrupt
no,
you,
no,
but
no, no,
that's the video you tried to show earlier. Like, if people think you and I don't care about technique, they've never taken money out of their wallet to come to me, because
right,
I actually care that
right.
their technique changes. And I care so much that I'm willing to allow them to fail in front of me, because I know that when I help them go through the process of how to practice, they're going to get better. It's, I mean, look, you can look at any PGA Tour player, LPGA Tour player, or your recreational golfer at their club. They do not raise to the level of their training, they lower to the level of their training. And that's a really hard concept for a lot of people to accept, because if they're good in practice, they can't figure out why they're good on the course. And there are definitely athletes that practice their way into a problem. And there are other athletes that practice their way out of a problem. And you just have to decide, who are you? And I guess that's my long-winded way to say your study about the surgeons is right. But I don't believe you have to do more surgeries to be more effective. I believe you have to see more stuff.
Yeah,
Things have to go wrong more. Like, I'm not a surgeon, and I'm not going to sit here and tell
that
you
was
that I
it
can
right
handle
there.
it.
I'm going to cut you off. That was it right there because it's the problem solving. Okay,
Yep,
I don't care what skill you're talking about. It's the problem solving, the being forced to have to come up with a solution from scratch that is what keeps you raising the bar, right?
for sure.
Okay. And that's what's going to happen over the duration of those surgeons' careers. I guarantee you that is probably the primary element of what led to their autonomous performance, right? They can just kind of go into the zone and just do what they do and come out of it and not even really remember the details, right? That's kind of
Yeah,
that.
they what is flow, right? We could do a
Right.
7 hour podcast on flow,
Sure.
but flow and getting in this mindset of being able to access your feels is because you you've learned the ability to transfer a cognitive thought into a kinesthetic feel. And that doesn't happen unless you're more external than internal. And I would love if someone's watching this and says you're wrong, like, please send me the information that says the more
You
internal
won't
you
find it.
are, the better you are. I would also love for someone to tell me, hey, the less varied or variability that you have in your training, the better. That's not actually true. It might mean that in that moment, I can get a player to have their desired numbers on TrackMan if I let them hit 10 balls. But as soon as I move them from that environment and bring them back, the regression is more than if I'm training them where they're moving around and they're developing competency because they have the ability to then come back, go through a process, right? I 100% believe that a player should be internal at a point in their process. You look at a player, Padraig Harrington's having a ton of success, and he talks about his practice swing to hit that fade. It looks extreme because he's trying to move the low point 5 feet in front of the ball. And then you watch him hit the shot, and it doesn't look that extreme. And that's not this feel versus real thing. That's him having to have this internal feel. So then when he's external over the ball, it's inside of that sweet spot, right?
Sure. Sure. But that kind of even, again, that goes back to the point, one of the fads, and you've been around long enough to know that there are fads in golf and instruction and coaching and development, just like there is in every industry. One of the things is everybody's getting shallow, man. So I go through Instagram and everybody's got their ass out like a duck. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's cool if you're a steep swinger of the golf club and need to shallow out, right? I'm all about the over exaggeration drills if we're applying them in the right context.
No,
right?
I love that. And look, as a coach, I have preferences. You have preferences. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that some of my preferences aren't aesthetic, but I probably have a depth.
Your preference is correlated to a ball flight, though.
Yeah, and I would also say that my preferences are because I know that there's a correlation to their performance, right?
Absolutely.
But also I look at you talk about that surf injury, you talk about, hey, how you have to early extend. We have that conversation. And then I go, okay, what's my preference for someone that has to early extend? Not what's my preference for, like, look, I think Joaquin Neiman's the man, and I've known Joaquin since he was a little kid, and I think that's amazing. I can't have you swing like Joaquin. You physically can't do it. So if I'm trying to get you to have that motion, we are going to not just fail. You're going to fire me because you're going to say this doesn't work. So I think as an athlete, it's your job to decide, do you want to take a risk and say, I don't care what I look like in practice. I care what my scorecard says when I perform. And I love the fact that you've worked with, wounded warriors, amputees. That is so hard, right? Like, as a coach, I see elite level players that get to work out 6 days a week. Their bodies are amazing. Their minds are amazing. Their motivation is off the charts. And there are times where I'm like, damn, I can't figure this out. But having an athlete in front of you that they can't do anything with their lead side makes you think outside the box. And so a lot of these guys that have preferences for, yeah, exactly. These guys that have this desired look, they're probably only working with one type of player.
Yeah. I mean, so I thought I was hot shit when I finally got involved with the veterans, right? I was coming, my first, I was actually with Dan Merrill. You know Dan? Dan's up at Penn State now, right? You guys were together.
Yeah, Dan's the man.
So I met Dan. He was coming. I was going into a summer internship down at Hank Haney in Louisville, Texas, and he had just come off an internship, and they hired him on full time. And we're doing hundreds of kids throughout the summer, man. I mean, it's every day, all day long. You got a morning camp, an afternoon camp, and it's just you got good players coming in, obviously, and everything. But it really exposed me to the busy academy side of golf, right? So coming out of that, coming back home, started up my own little deal while I was in college, thinking I'm hot shit. I got involved in the wounded this SMGA, Salute Military Golf Association.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, it's a wake-up call because you're like, well, this dude is carbon fiber and steel from essentially his pelvic socket on his right side. And like he's been on this leg for 3 months and doing physical therapy and stuff. And so again, my big thing was we focus on the impact variables and we put them in a position where within their possible range of motion, we allow them to deliver the proper impact variables. But using it with, again, results constraints, you know what I mean? And that micro variability, just like my speed strap. My speed strap is essentially a target that's broken down into 5 micro targets. And I can call out, you can sit in one spot and I can call out a color and have you hit a different shot that your technique is only varied by an inch, 2 inches, right? And so you have to learn how to develop a feel for those subtleties.
I use that thing every day, man. Like I'm not
I-
trying to just make you feel good,
yeah,
but I do believe that your products allow a coach to set up, right? Like if we talked about Rob Gray and constraints led learning, or his podcast, right? Perception action coupling is phenomenal, right? Or his book on how we learn to move. But when you look at your game, whether it's the speed strap or it's your boxes or whatever you set up, if the coach says, hey, the player's issue, whether it's that amputee that can't get to their left side, and you say to them, you know what? I know what I can do. I can ask them to fly this ball a certain distance. I can watch how they figure it out, right? I think that's what's missing a little bit in
sure.
golf is like coaches just want to tell. And when I was 20, 22,
Yeah.
and I had taken every certification under the sun, like, I mean, I went on tour, certification tour, right? And I was like, I got all this information. I must know what I'm doing. And then I would talk for like 40 minutes of the hour lesson. And the guy's like,
Yeah.
got this much better, right? But now what I would say is what I do really well is I let the game, or I'm not so much a game guy, I'm more of a task guy, but same thing. It is
Sure.
probably my
I
vernacular
just
changes.
frame it in a way that you
But
don't realize you're
yeah,
practicing.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
And when they're doing that task, that's when I'm doing the coaching. That's when I'm making the technical intervention. That's when I'm teaching them what to do. So I think what you do with the speed strap, or what I do with circuit training, or what another coach might do that I would love to learn that's better than what I do, is there's constantly an opportunity to make the athlete aware
Mhm.
of, if they change their technique, they're going to change their performance.
Right.
It's
Well, see,
not.
now, go ahead. Go
Go
ahead. I'll
ahead.
let you
No,
finish.
no, you go
Yeah.
ahead.
So you touched on this a little while ago. You were saying our role as the coach is to, kind of diagnose that ball flight, right? So
Yeah.
see the result. That result is our quantifiable feedback. It's our job to analyze that feedback and present it in a way that makes it understandable for the student, right? So
Yeah.
and if you skill development papers, there's 2 different types of knowledge, right, that need to be present in order to develop a skill. You've got knowledge of performance, which is essentially the variables that are going into produce a task. Okay, I need to know what's going into the task. And then knowledge of result, that's our feedback, where we can deduce from our result, okay, maybe I'm a little long. Okay, well, that felt, based on my auditory feedback, is a little clicky. Maybe I was, a few grooves low, right? And so having students diagnose their own shots is one of the most brilliant things I've ever done as an instructor, because I'm able to shut up and not fill their head with nonsense. And I've actually seen you do this with students. Well, it was a field video, as a matter of fact. You had the student tell you what they were feeling and kind of twisted their perception into reality. Rather than telling them
Always.
what's going on, you pulled it out of them, right? And that's the kind of things that leads to the retention we're talking about. I learned a long time ago, I could tell a student something and they would definitely forget it by the time I saw them on the lesson tee. But if I coaxed the information out of them through logic and reason, right, questioning them, making them fit those puzzle pieces together, they never forgot it. Right. Once you get that aha moment, like the retention, it's almost guaranteed. Not the motor
Yep.
skill behind it, essentially, right? Because we know also from the research that's out there, if we're not constantly using a particular motion, that skill does deteriorate over time, right? I mean, we've
Yeah.
You know, we could talk about research papers on that all day long, you
I
know, but
agree.
the,
And I think what you're saying basically, right? I can give you an example. Ian and I spent some time with the Canadian national team recently, and I had a girl message me and she said, "Hey, I now realize the way that I practice directly influences the way that I play."
absolutely.
And she said to me, "I want to change the way that I play." And awesome. She said, so I now need to apply what you talked about. And I said, cool. So what do you want to do? What do you want to get better at? Right. And so she needs to get better at pitching. She needs to hit her landing spot, but she didn't have the understanding that she didn't really understand spin loft. Right. So teaching her spin loft was easy. In in a classroom, I could have given that spin loft lesson in 5 minutes, right? Hey, this is your angle of attack. This is your launch. This is what we have to do. These are the variables that affect spin loft. That could have been in Russian for her, and she would have had no idea. But
Right.
when I put her on a task, and I said, "Look, the ball has to carry this far, but it has to stop within this corridor." She looked at me and she's like, "Okay, roll out, roll out, roll out." Couldn't figure it out, and she said, "Zach, what do I have to do to get it to spin?" In that moment, I had a choice. I was either going to make her internal or I was going to make her external. And that's where I think the magic of what you and I do, or what
Yeah.
great coaches do, is okay, you want it to spin. You have a false belief that loft dictates spin. Let's hit it lower so we can increase spin. And the way you're going to hit it lower is this. The way you're going to create more friction on the club is this. But what I want you to do is pick a land spot and be so committed that the ball stops. She hit one and she looked at me and she goes, I never knew I could do that.
Right.
And it wasn't like I gave her some amazing information. It's that I guided her to access the things that she already had inside of her. And that's really the art of coaching, right? Is to say,
Yeah.
did I teach her some new release pattern? If she's listening, I'm apologizing, but yeah, I did. But I didn't actually do it. She taught herself because
Coached
I
it out of
guided her
her.
there.
Right.
Yeah, and
Right.
so I
Yeah.
that's really the reality, man. It's like the environment creates the opportunity to learn, and then the athlete's desire or motivation is what makes it either last or not last. And
Yeah. Well, you can't
I'm
teach
lucky.
grit. Unfortunately, you can't teach grit. I mean, we can give lessons and kind of guide them into situations where they can develop grit. But man, some kids are just tough as nails right out of the right out of the crib, and then other kids you have to kind of help them along the way. But
Yeah, and I think right, like if you can teach speed, and that's a skill. I think you can teach grit,
yeah,
but you're not
can't
going to
teach
be
it.
able to,
You
you're not
gotta,
going to be
you
able to
got. It's
tell
kind of like
somebody
a, it's kind of
how to
like a
have
kung
grit.
fu master kind of deal. You know what I mean? Like, I could, the same thing we
Yeah.
were just talking about. I can't tell you how to grit. I can just see if you're going to deal with these situations that I'm going to put you through, and you'll know. I mean, some kids don't have it, and that's when you got to readjust. And you know,
Yeah, and I think grit, or I think um effort, or I think those intangible skills are really our job as a coach, is to coach them, right? If I have a recreational golfer who's 55 and says, "Hey, I'm going to practice 2 days a week and I want to beat my buddies on a Saturday," I can definitely help him,
yeah,
but I can also ruin him because he thinks,
right,
"Oh man, the only way I can get better is if I hit more balls." It's not true. Honestly, the way that a lot of people need to get better is they need to spend less time on the range and they need to play more.
yeah,
So you give them a task or a constraint-led learning task on the golf course and they get better, right? Like one of my favorite games is like, can you learn how to shoot under par? But if you make birdie on a hole, you get an easy chip. And if you get it up and down, you get to keep your birdie. If you don't get it up and down, you have to record par. And then if you make par, you have to hit a slightly harder chip. If you make bogey, slightly harder chip. And then no time I've ever played do you have to then validate. But that skill teaches a player there's a task inside of the task. There's this desire to make birdie. And then I have this moment. And do I want this moment because I'm so excited about making birdie? Or do I look at my coach and say, this is so stupid, I never have to do this in a game? And the athletes that look at me and say, wow, I shot 6 under without the game, and I shot 4 under with the game. Those are the players that you're like, wow, now we just took your statistics. And if you have that short game when you play, your ball striking can regress and your score can improve. And that's what I love.
Yeah. Now you brought up something really important there, and it's what I call the principle of compound goals, right? Okay. So yeah, we're trying to hit one shot. And a perfect example is the speed straps, right? The putting, the distance, where we're working on distance when I've got the pucks inside each zone, right? So
Yep.
each colored zone would be my bottom tier goal. That's my managed shot, right? My good miss, essentially.
Yep.
Right. The puck's there. If I hit the puck, okay, that's my mediocre miss. And then on the puck, we have the quadrant, right, that was colored differently. So we're focused on point of entry. So as we tier up those goals, we get narrower and narrower and narrower, right? So that we're increasing the focus into the task. But there's always that security there that even if we screw up a little bit, we've still got a second goal and a third goal, all of which benefit us, right? I think that's an important principle, especially with new beginners and kids that have not yet developed that grit, right? Because one of the things, and I'm sure you've seen it as an elite coach, I've seen plenty of it, specialization in use and burning out, man. If you do not keep them engaged in a fun way, and challenge them at an appropriate level and give them the room to screw up is probably the biggest thing I've seen in youth sports. Now, this is soccer as well, because I coached soccer for the last couple of years.
Nice.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a minute, because I have put everything that we've talked about into practice on the pitch also. And
Nice.
we dominated last year, bro. Like, we had parents filming us because they said we were cheating and stacking our team. Like, we scored, let's see, we went undefeated last year, and we scored 89 goals to the competition's 15. Okay. Not once did I work on a technical thing outside of dynamic training, right? If we were ever working on something technical, it was framed within the perspective of the game, as it would be played within mini games or mini tasks or drills, right? But that
with
was always
context, with
right.
the contextual interference. It's amazing.
Yeah. And it was always secondary. Okay, so the precursor is always the performance, right? Because our technique, as we modify, we can do a good job a whole bunch of different times. But even as a professional, right? You've been earning your income on the lesson tee for a long time now. Even as much as you know now, you're still refining, right? Even at your high level.
Every day, man,
always
I study.
refining.
Every day.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and I think so. I mean, what you did in soccer, like I want to learn more, because so my daughter's a competitive wake surfer, right? And I didn't know anything about wake surfing when she decided, hey, this is what I'm going to do, and she's pretty good, right? Like I'll tell you she's good.
Of it, man. It's cool.
I'll tell you she's good, but I'm not going to tell her she's good, right? But she's good. But when she practices, you know what she's doing? She's surfing. I'm not having her practice on a board where she can do, like, they make these training boards, right? And everyone's like, oh man, that's amazing. You can learn
about the Indo board.
Yeah, you can learn to shove it, right? And it's like, that's cool. But where does she do that in the wave? Where does she do that when there's whitewash coming up, right? No, man. Like I honestly can tell you this, dude. She's so good because we practice in the environment. We'll be going and she'll be surfing, and like one of her good skills is that she can do like body varials, or she can do 360s, or she can do 180s, like or whatever. Good. Yeah, right. So she does that. But while we're driving and she's surfing, I changed the speed,
Okay.
right? And she's like, she does it, and then it's allowed, right? Because she's 40 feet back in the wave. She's like, what happened to the wave? I'm like, whatever, dude, just figure it out. And then when she comes in, she's like, when you were going faster, what I felt that I had to do was I had to brake more because the boat was going faster. So I adjusted my body like this. And let me tell you something, Georgia, I don't know anything. Like I'm a novice at surfing. And I look at her and I go, and that's why you're good, because you were able to pay attention to the context. You adapted to your environment. And guess what you did? You didn't say, stop the boat, dad. You figured out how to do this in an environment that's different than what you get. In her sport, someone's driving the boat in a competition, right? Like she goes to the national championship in a couple weeks, and I'm not driving the boat. So someone else is driving the boat. So she has to learn, what if someone doesn't stay consistent, right? And boats have cruise control, so maybe that's a poor example, but what if there's waves? What if there's other variables,
Wait.
right? So
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, right? Whether it's soccer or it's wake surfing or it's golf, if you want your athletes to be great, you want their technique to be so good that when something goes wrong, they know how to access that technique to such a precise level of skill that they can thrive regardless of the situation, right? Like I was lucky enough last year, I had a player play at Augusta, right? And this kid, we got there, and it's pretty cool that you get to go like you get 5 days before the tournament, not the week of the tournament, but five like scouting trips before. We stood on number two. He had a downhill lie with I think it was 5 iron. The ball's above his feet, but he's on a downhill lie. Bunker right is dead. Flag is that Saturday pin on the left. And I don't say a word. And this thing comes out. I mean, it ends up in 3 fairway, right? And I'm like, what happened? And he goes, dude, I got to practice off uneven lies. If I'm going to compete here, like I got to figure out how to practice off uneven lies. And he really struggled, right? Like he didn't play as well as he wanted to that week. But that failure that he had at the Masters led to his success at St. Andrews at the 150th Open, because the failure then said to him, I have to get better at my ability to adapt.
Right.
And that's what my daughter did. It sounds like that's what your soccer team does. And like, just to try and hammer this home to people, technique is probably at the hierarchy of things, but it's not your technique in a sterile environment. It's, does your technique hold up in an environment with chaos, in an environment where there are things outside of your control? And that's where the magic happens. And the only way to actually have that happen is if training is messy.
Yeah. Yeah. There's two keys to it. And this is backed up by research too. Again, we're talking about failure being what we want in our training scenarios. There's a direct correlation between failure in practice and performance. Okay. The more you fail in practice, the higher trajectory for performance increases are, and the longer you retain the skills that you got. Okay. And I've got like
100%.
two simple rules, right? Okay. Again, the appropriate challenge for me, I want to inject an appropriate challenge into the training. And that appropriate challenge is going to be based on one thing, and that is the exploitation of whatever weakness they have. Okay. Like,
Love that.
you know what I mean? Like, if that's what we need to work on, not only am I going to put you in a situation that exposes that, we're going to get you to that point, like you were talking about earlier, that we're just going to be pissed, right? But
Yeah,
that's
and we're gonna probably not let you practice that in repetition.
right,
You're going to limit that,
right,
right? So
right.
if
There's going to be varying
you're
degrees of that exploitation, essentially. You know what I
yeah,
mean? I'm a
yeah,
big one, maybe two balls from a location, dude. If I let you have a two ball, it's just to make sure that you have the functional knowledge to self-correct, and you have the understanding of what went wrong with the first one. But other than that, we're going to a different spot, different target, different lie, different turf condition, whatever the case may be. And again, a lot of the times it's going to correlate directly to your weakness. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
love that.
we got a minute, brother. Before I let you plug everything away, the thing that I guess we're taking away from this is if you suck at play, you suck at practice.
Yeah, and if your practice doesn't have spacing variability and challenge when you get to the golf course, let's hope that everything just goes perfect and you'll play fine.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Dude, we're gonna have to do this again. I loved having you on. This is one of my favorite chats so far for sure. And we got to catch up in person, man. It's been like, let's see, Gravity Fit. It's been like 4 years then. So we
Yeah,
got to
dude.
catch.
Well, when you launch this new thing, bring it down. Let's put it into play at the academy.
I'll
Let's
shoot you some.
put it
Oh, here you go. Here,
put
should I unveil it now? Because I'll have the commercials on here. I told you about it earlier. I won't explain it to the people at home, but this is it right here. So what do you think there? Can you see that?
Dude, let's go. That is so
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. So
What's
the
the
die.
diameter of that thing? I can put that thing on a green from 100 yards and my guys
Oh
will
yeah.
dominate.
High visibility, bro, and it's tough as nails. So good talk, man.
All right, guys. So just like part one, part two, we got a little long-winded and cut off right there at the end. Make sure to check Zach out on all the popular forums, Facebook, Instagram. He's probably over on Twitter. I know for a fact he's over on YouTube. Check out his website, zachparkergolf.com, and make sure to jump on Amazon and grab a copy of his book that he wrote with Ian Highfield and the guys at GLT. Great conversation. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. We'll have another talk up here soon. And until next time, hit them well.